I drove a mile and a half off the highway, and there it was, Pontoppidan Lutheran. Wretched and run down, with peeling paint and sagging steps, and an altogether forlorn look. The gate in the barbed wire fence was open. The summer had been unseasonably cool, and I shivered as I got out of my car, wishing I had brought a sweater. There were no sounds except the creaking of a weathered decorative windmill with rusty hardware. In the typical style of a rural cemetery, the gravestones were on 3 sides of the church. Earlier in the day, at the town Art in the Park, I was drawn to an ornate pendant on a crude and heavy gold chain. The circular stone was about 40 centimeters in diameter and a glossy, almost velvety black. I said to the artist, "I'll have this." The woman in charge of the display booth looked up from her paperback novel. She was middle-aged, vaguely goth or psychobilly in appearance, in her retro black satin sock dress and white face powder. "You've purchased a piece of history." My ears perked up. "How so?" "You do know that this is black onyx?" she asked me in her truck stop waitress voice. "Yes, it's amazing how you've set such a common and abundant stone in gold. What with gold going at $1,700 an ounce. Not to mention the fact that black onyx is color enhanced." "You mean dyed?" "A well-kept trade secret for centuries. The process is described by Roman historian Pliny the Elder in his natural history writings." The woman was no dummy. Her costume and makeup went with the merchandise she was selling. "Didn't he die in the ashes from Mount Vesuvius that buried Pompeii and Herculaneum?" "That was around the time of Christ," I said. Gemologists don't want to acknowledge the fact that black onyx was at one time in great demand. Queen Victoria wore black jewelry from the day her husband died to the end of her life, and her subjects followed suit. It was popular in this country after the Civil War, and later used widely by Art Deco craftsmen. So I paid for my very expensive bauble and fastened it around my neck. "The stone is so smooth and as black as soot. How did it get that way?" The saleslady had lit a cigarette in a long holder. Her carmined lips gripped the shiny black cylinder, then blew out a perfectly round smoke ring. "You soak regular chalcedony in sugar water for several hours, then boil the specimen in acid. The carbonic material is burned to charcoal. It can be any carbonic material. The ancients probably used blood." I swallowed hard. "But this onyx is of a more recent vintage." "I bought that stone at a local estate sale. There was a story about the family, something that had happened in the early part of the 20th century. A murder and dismemberment and a suspect who walked. I was curious, but now that the stone is yours, the matter is irrelevant to me." And that's how I left Art in the Park and found myself in the Pontoppidan Cemetery, searching for the Ingebrigtsen graves. I would photograph the headstones and carry the images in my billfold. My new necklace could make quite a conversation piece. I finally located the flat monuments. I had to chuckle. Yes, I've been told I have a morbid sense of humor. 2 graves were in one plot, and the distance from the head to the foot of the man named John Ingebrigtsen was half that of the woman, his wife. The jewelry artist had told me his arms and legs had been chopped off, hadn't she? And his body burned in a brush pile fire? A shortened torso could be buried in a much smaller box. John's son-in-law claimed self-defense and was acquitted. Some of the old-timers buried in this very same Potabadon cemetery served on the jury. Then I noticed the disturbed soil. I kneeled for a better look. I'm no expert, but it was obvious someone had made a recent attempt to replace sod and make the grass and dirt look normal. Then a deep, gravelly baritone voice said, "Hello." I jumped up, startled, my heart beating wildly. He was tall and pale and dressed in a formal black suit. A dry, dusty odor emanated from him. His hair was white, but his face was well preserved and bordering on handsome. "What brings you out here?" he demanded. "Well, I am interested in history. Was told I might find some here. What about you? Do you live around these parts, or go to this church?" "My great-grandfather may have. He's buried right here. His name was John Ingebrigtsen." My heart gave another thump. I had no desire to touch this man's flesh, but politeness had been bred in my bones. So I extended my hand and said, "My name's Dinah, and yours is?" "Jared." His hands were colder than any I had ever felt before. By this time I was not only shivering, I was trembling and trying to conceal my apprehension. I could sense rain clouds moving in. Then my necklace caught Jared's eye. "Where did you get that?" he demanded. "At an art fair." "The stone is stolen, you know. That witch is a grave robber. Look, you can see somebody's been messing around with my great-grandfather's remains. I'll buy that from you. I'll give you $50. "But I paid over $2,000. "I don't have that kind of money. Give it to me or I'll take it." And he reached for my throat. I stepped backwards, then turned and ran. I could hear Jared following me. When I jumped in my car and locked the doors, he pressed his cadaver-like white face up against the driver's side window. I made it down the dirt road and out to the highway before the storm descended. Wind shook my car. Pink and white lightning split the sky, and thunder cracked and roared. I drove through heavy rain back to my motel room. Then my cell phone rang, and rang, and rang. The caller ID said unidentified. I didn't know how Jared had gotten my number, but I knew it was him, and I was scared.